Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about first versus third person. And by that I mean the viewpoint you get in the games you play. And of course I'm going to talk about role-playing games here because that's my thing. I get asked this question a lot, and I've answered it a lot, but always in comments. But most recently I got asked by RoboCG, who asked, what are the pros and cons of making RPG games as isometric versus first person? And what features are working better or worse in both scenarios, in your opinion? Similarly to turn-based combats being better in isometric. So, that's the question I want to ask. You may go, well, why did you wait so long to make a video? The advantage of making a video is when I get asked a lot of questions, I can make a video and then just point people to it. And in this case, I do want to point out, I've never chosen the viewpoint for any of my games. My design chose it for me. And I'll talk about that later on in the video. So, just to make it clear, I never went, I think I'll make a first-person game today. And then I did that. Instead, I did all the design stuff I talk about. And first person was the most reasonable choice to implement a game with those designs. Also, I want to talk about isometric, the word isometric here for a second. There are a lot of different projection types, and I used to incorrectly call Fallout Cavalier Oblique, but it's not. It's trimetric. I actually have a video in the queue already about projection types. That will be coming sometime in June. It would have been great to reference it in this video, but RoboCG is a master member, so his video has jumped the queue. In fact, today is Sunday. Tomorrow's video, Monday, has already become available to master members like RoboCG. So this video will become Wednesday's video, and my Wednesday one gets pushed away in the queue. I think it was something I wanted to talk about, so I'll just throw it to the end. I do talk, though, in that June video about all the different styles of how to do third-person projection, including over-the-shoulder cameras. So basically, for the purpose of this video, if you can see the player character, I'm going to call it third person. Also, if you're wondering, my finger's in a splint because for work and for fun, I've been playing so many games in the last few weeks, like 8 to 12 hours a day of games, that I woke up one morning and this finger was bent like this and I couldn't straighten it out. I saw my doctor who basically said, Mr. Kane, you're in your 50s. You can't be playing video games for 8 to 12 hours a day. To which I responded eloquently, shut up. So now my finger's in a splint for a while because I play too many video games. I know, that's what a horrible problem to have. Anyway, the way I've decided to talk about first versus third person is I'm going to talk about all the advantages of first person and then all of the advantages of third person. Remembering that the advantages for one will be disadvantages for the other. That's why it's the advantage for that one. That way I don't have to do pros and cons for first and pros and cons for third. When I'm done with all this, I'll talk to you about how you can recommend, how you will decide what one is the best for your game. So I'll recommend how you can choose first versus third person if you're thinking about making a game. So let's start with first person. This is probably way more common now in games. It is considered by many people to be far more immersive because the player is this character. The player is walking and seeing and interacting with items in the environment as this character. So some players need this and avoid third person. But like every other design feature I've ever mentioned in the history of this channel, they're the opposite. There are some people out there that first person makes them sick. Sometimes it has to do with head bobbing. Sometimes it has to do with the field of view of the first person camera. For whatever reason, they avoid first person and only play third. So once you pick first versus third, you are going to cut some people out. Could you do both? Yes, but it will be expensive because the very next advantage of first person is you skip needing a lot of player animations and models because in the first person mode, the player only sees their character's hands. So they need to see the weapons they're using, some casting animations, basically the sleeves of the armor, but nothing else. In fact, Many first-person games, the only time you can see your character in a third-person camera is in inventory. And there they can really limit what animations are needed. So you don't need to have a lot of the animations that you would need in third person. Many first-person RPGs don't show animations of the player character opening a chest or picking a lock. So you save a lot of bandwidth. And animation takes a while. Good animation takes a long while. So you save a lot right there by going first person. You can also avoid showing things like weapon swapping. In first person, you've got this weapon. It's like, oh, I need to change it. It can go out of view and come back in with the other one. In third person, you need to show that. And then that leads to some interesting questions like, hey, where did that rocket launcher go? Where's the player keeping that? Do I want to know? Maybe that's why his walk animation looks like how it looks. I don't want to know. But it does. I've played first person games or third person games with some really weird weapon swapping. So first person gets rid of that. You don't have to show it. Just move the hand out of view and it comes back with the new weapon. Same thing for reloads. If you don't want to show reload. Some do, and it's cool. Some just move the weapon down and it comes back with all the ammo restored. There's also one of the really big advantages, especially for an RPG, for first person, is there's no need to adjust what is drawn based on the player view. Because the player view and the player character view are the same view. So you don't need to not draw, which is called clipping, creatures on the other side of a wall. The clipping is based on the player's view. Usually the Z buffer and all that in the on the video card will handle all that for you. In third person, you may decide, well, there's a wall here, so I'm not going to draw the players here. There's a wall here. I won't draw the creatures here. Some do. They don't clip it, and that gives you an advantage. Some do clip it, and then they have to constantly be performing these line of sight calculations with the player's character to decide whether or not it gets clipped. This gets even more complicated if there's a party. Do you check to see if anyone in the party can see that creature? Similarly, if you go inside a structure in first person, you just walk inside. Couldn't be simpler. Nothing changes. But once you go third person, you're going to have to rip the roof off. Or bring the camera in and have it bob up by the roof. And sometimes decide, oh, well, there's a pillar in the way. I've got to move around. None of this happens in first person because the player view is the player character view. And that is a very big advantage. Some play styles, therefore, benefit from being first person. The one I can think of that's the most obvious is stealth. Because first person will convey better what the player can see and hear. And in turn, who might be seeing and hearing the player. The player knows when they're in a dark area because they see themselves in a dark area. They hear their own footsteps. So they know what's happening because their view is the view of the player character. I think that may be all the pure advantages of first person. So let's jump into third person. So a third-person game, remember, that's anything where you see the player character. So it might be over the shoulder. It might be, trimetric, dimetric. I'm not going to tell you what type of projection it is, but if you can see the player character, I'm calling that third person. A huge advantage you get with first person that most people don't think of is objects in the world don't need as much detail. Because the camera is pulled back, you can create objects with either less vertices or their textures aren't as high res, don't show as much detail. This makes it a lot easier for solo devs to do third person because you don't have to think about your art bandwidth. Conversely, bigger developers, non-solo developers, can make more objects because objects that have less vertices and need less detail on their textures, you can make more of them in the same amount of time. So win-win, right? It's either easier or you can have a lot more variety. Great. Third person also gives the player a better view of the surrounding area. So they're not just seeing ahead of themselves, but they're also seeing to the sides and behind. This makes combat more strategic. But let me talk about combat for a second. I think combat in third person can more easily be real-time or turn-based or anything in between, real-time with pause. They all work just easy in turn-based. Look at Arcanum. It had both real-time and turn-based. I have a whole video about that. I'll link it below. Also, there's a video about what it would take for me to turn Fallout into real-time. And I'm talking about Fallout 1. I have a video on that real-time Fallout and why I wouldn't do it. So I'll link that below. So, and yes, there are some turn-based first-person games out there. Usually they add restrictions because turn-based and first-person is a little awkward. So you end up with something like grid movement. Grimrock does this. There are older games that do this too. Turn-based, in my mind, leads to much more strategic and plan-based combat versus real-time, which is tactical, moment-to-moment reacting. You also get things like the party arrangement matters, and I'll talk about group play in a second. So turn order matters. These are all factors that make combat a lot more interesting, and you can have items that adjust these things and stats that factor into these things. Things like ability ranges and area of effect, these can be all more finely tuned in turn-based because players will be able to, with nothing else going on, measure how far away they are, realize that their wizard has to take 2 steps forward to bring that thing into range. If they're doing a fireball, they can determine exactly who's in the fireball. This is far more finely tuned as opposed to real time. It's like, I'm throwing it and I hope nobody gets hit by it who's a friend, and I hope none of the enemies walk out of the area of effect. It's just a lot easier and more strategic in turn-based, which is easier to do in third person. And that leads me to group and party play. That's also easier to do in third person because you're backed out and you can see them all. There's a lot of pros here for group and party play. There's, I won't summarize because I have a video on solo versus party play. But a quick summary of it would be you can play a lot of characters, which lets you feel like what's it like to be a wizard, what's it like to be a thief, what's it like to be a cleric in one playthrough. You don't have to do multiple playthroughs. It's easier to handle enemies because you have a group that you control and you can fight the enemy. You can take on more enemies or harder enemies. And frequently in group party-based games, the player's game isn't over unless everybody in the party dies. There is no single character. Like in Fallout and Arcanum, you could have companions, but if your player character died, the game was over. But in Temple and Pillars, as long as any one person in the party lives, you can keep playing. So, why would you pick first person over third person? My recommendation would be if first person, if your game wants the player as the character, it's very immersive. Immersion is one of your pillars. Then you probably want to go first person, probably pick real-time combat. And this is especially good if you lack the animation bandwidth to make most of the player character animations. Great, first person's got you covered. Third person is if you want to make a party and you want the player to be able to control the whole party. And maybe you want turn-based combat, or you want turn-based or real-time or anything in between. And you really care about having strategic combat. Your abilities are designed around the idea that the player will be able to measure distances, have very accurate area of effects and all that. Which brings me to the point, your game's design, your design pillars and your design goals should be deciding this for you. There should never be a big question in your mind whether you want to do first person or third person. Once you've designed the game, and I assume you did your setting and then you made your story and then you made your system mechanics, from those, you should know whether your game should be first person or third person. It should just fall out of those design decisions that you've already made and your goals. So I hope RoboCG, this answered your question.